Hey, Russell, thanks for joining us today. As a way of getting started, tell us a little bit about yourself.
It's a pleasure, Brian. First off, I detect, and you may detect that I've got a UK accent today.
Yeah.
So sorry about that if I sound all, slow and pompous and not posh, clearly, but a little bit less bouncy and jumping all over the place than some of your other guests. My background's, I've worked in sales and marketing for a long time. I started my first career as a professional musician. Then went and worked in sales and marketing. I've worked in that sort of arena, selling cars, selling IP, selling companies, selling training, selling time, and selling consultancy. And as part of that, I became a psychologist because I was always interested in this idea of how do you get people to change their behaviors? How do you get people to change their mind? What's the psychology behind that? And I started there as a behavioral psychologist and now much more interested in sort of the neuroscience side of things. And I guess at the sort of final conclusion, for the last couple of years since I sold my last company, I decided to really sort of just become a consultant and do what everybody else does and get on the old book and speaking trail and the sort of portfolio career thing.
Yeah.
And now I'd spend my time going and helping and advising companies, not just to do with sales and marketing, but to do with change and behavior. And one of the big specialities that I've really picked up over the last couple of years, which I've got really fascinated in, it started with the subject of resilience and this idea of how do you bounce back when things go wrong, which is something obviously as a salesperson you've got to be brilliant at. But then increasingly this idea of burnout and how burnout and resilience work together. And then I sort of concentrate my work into two areas, one which is working with individuals using a variety of techniques, but specifically in companies working with leaders. And we run a series of programs called Tough Love Leadership, which is all about basically how do you get the results you want, but in a way that's sort of congruent and consistent and modern. Because I think there's a sort of a move now to recognize that, especially working in the large corporate sector, that the old ideas are no longer true. The fast-talking, sharp-suited salesman, who's all about the next deal and how shiny their suit can be, is not the person that actually wins multi-million-dollar deals. That might work on a sales forecourt, but it doesn't work anymore in this sort of in the professional B2B world as well.
Cool. So people in the UK get burned out as well? It's not just the US.
Amazingly enough, they do. We do have stress and pressures over here.
Yeah.
You've already insulted twice today, and now you go again. Yeah. What's fascinating about burnout, it's a universal condition. It's actually a human condition. So it doesn't matter which culture you come from. It doesn't matter which part of the world you come from. Really, burnout can be found anywhere. And although the definition of burnout came from the States in the mid-70s, and it was really focused towards people in the sort of medical community and people in the people space, people that were therapying people, other people, psychiatrists, mental health workers, care workers, and such like. Really, it's become applicable to anyone. And I work with a couple of guys who are coaching the Silicon Valley area who are highly aspirational, highly driven, really successful, earning more money than really you can almost count, and they've burned out. And so people think it's something that affects the low paid, the low grade, the sort of rusting, bored demographic, but it's not. It's something that it can hit anybody at any time in any culture at any place, and when it does, you've got to have some strategies to deal with it, because actually it's not a great place to be.
And how do you know if you're burnt out or just depressed or just in a slump?
That's a great question. And there's been as you can imagine, once academics got hold of the subject of burnout, they spent a lot of time examining what shade of pink the cover of the book should be called, but also then actually working out the differences between anxiety, depression, and burnout. And it is actually, there are different things. And the thing about burnout, which is characteristic about it, it is a workplace condition. And so the first thing that happens is you suffer from extreme exhaustion. So you're extremely tired. So you are emotionally wiped. Whereas depressed people have sort of no emotional content. When you have burnout, you recognize that you have emotions, but they're just stretched so thin you can't do anything with them. And the second element of burnout is that you lose your sort of passion for stuff. You lose your ability to bond with other people. You almost become a little bit cynical. And then thirdly, you sort of lose your what's called efficacy, which is just productivity. You use your ability. If you're utterly worn out and you're not sleeping, obviously, and you can't be bothered, and you don't care, I mean, your productivity slumps to zero. And of course, it does look as if it's like depression, but actually you can get depression anywhere. Whereas, of course, burnout is particularly linked to the workplace. So it's particularly linked to stress, rust, and workplace addiction.
And is it something that we can recognize it before it's too late? I mean, because I've seen a lot of people, certainly later in careers in sales, where it's just, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
And and it's almost a downward spiral.
Yeah.
So how do you know when you're getting near burnout and you just need a vacation or you just need time off?
Well, that's great. And hold that thought about the vacation, because the vacation's entirely the wrong way of dealing with it. And that's really quite peculiar.
That's what I've been telling her.
Amazing. But don't do that holiday thing. So let's go back a step. So you asked a great question, which is how do you recognize it? And it's really one of those particular conditions where it's easier for other people to recognize it in you than it is in yourself, unless you've developed some form of self-awareness. Now, if you are particularly self-aware, you'll recognize in your body that you're actually losing your passion, you're losing your desire. That doesn't mean that you're working any less hard. It just means that it has less meaning. It means that it's costing you more. And more importantly, your sleep patterns are disturbed.
Sleep patterns, yeah.
So the first thing is, once you start thinking, oh, I've got to go to work today. All right, okay, well, I'm going to go to work today. How will I get through the day? Well, I'll negotiate a new incentive package. I'll drink as much coffee as possible.
Yep.
I'll get high in the sense of, we'll have lots of competitions. We'll go woo together as a sales team. Our manager will whip me a lot harder than usual. At the end of the day, I'll go home and I'll think, oh, what's the point? This is just, hopeless. And then you're tired on that journey home, and you get home and you sort of kick the cat, you sort of rude to the wife if you have one, or your significant other. You go to bed, you lie there tossing and turning, you think to yourself, oh, why am I doing this? Then you remember the money and the buzz, and you think, tomorrow here I go again. And that's the sort of typical slider burnout. But there's another type, which is the what we call high functioning burnout victims. And these are the people who love going to work. And I'm coaching a lawyer at the moment, and she said to me, my working day is from 6 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock at night. Then I go home at 10 o'clock at night, and it takes me about 45 minutes to go home, and I'll do a couple of hours when I get home. And then you start adding that up, and you think, well, when does she go to sleep?
Right, that was what I was thinking. I was like,
yeah. And she says, but I'm great, I'm absolutely fine. And she's a partner in a law firm. And her boss is saying, you're burning out. And she, no, I'm not. But all the signs are there. She's overworking. She's becoming a perfectionist. So she has a need to get it right, over and above the need for it to be good enough. It has to be perfect. Nobody else could do it but her. That's another sign of what's happening. And when she goes on holiday, as she said to me, when I say to her, do you go on holiday? She said, yes, I'm going on holiday a couple of weeks. I say, good. And I say, so how much work will you do? Oh, no work. Well, maybe just a couple of hours a day. But particularly when my partner's not really that, he wants to go off and do something else. So I'll stay at home and do some work.
Yeah.
And then you start to see the relationship chips coming in, because it's a bunch of sort of strange evidential things that wrap around what's going on. Everybody can see it. They're working longer hours. They're working themselves harder. And you'll start to notice in their faces, they become quite sweaty and they become really white, because they are shattered. But that high functioning burnout, they don't recognize it because they're getting the dopamine kick. They're getting this push. They're getting that sort of
reward.
Yeah. They're getting a reward.
Competition.
It's addiction.
That's what I was getting to, because it sounded like, addiction.
Yeah.
And
your top salespeople who are chasing the big deals, and they're really, really driven and really, really hungry, are addicted.
They're addicted.
The hunt, the result, the outcome, the reward,
yes.
And they push themselves harder and harder. And then one day they'll get a tiny little illness and they'll fall apart.
Yeah. See, what I always felt was, at least in the US, you're on a yearly comp plan. And so you're doing well. So December 31st, you're in your accelerator. So you're getting 3 to 5 times the commission rate for each deal. So you are dopamine overload.
Yeah.
I mean, it is. And then January 1st, you get a new comp plan, and all of a sudden you crash. It's like that next morning, and all of a sudden you just deplete it. So you go through this cycle year after year after year. And I've seen a lot of people I get that burnout phase without the addiction, the good part of it.
You're hitting the fundamental here, because the hormone at the heart of burnout is cortisol, which is a steroid hormone. Yeah. And of course, cortisol is known as the stress hormone. So the majority of burnout comes from stress. It comes from overwork,
pressure,
doing too much. Now, pressure is interesting because pressure is all internal. So it's the way you think about yourself. That's what creates pressure. So yes, your mindset, the way you have mental toughness, the cortisol work that's going on there, that drains you, it stresses you out. So even the people with the high dopamine kick, who are doing the high functioning stuff, have still got this cortisol drain in their system. So absolutely, as you say, when the dopamine drops off, plump, like that, you've still got all the cortisol going on. And then suddenly the stress catches you. So if the dopamine and the addiction doesn't get you, the cortisol does. Now, for most people who have a pretty dreadful job, and rather than sort of flaming out in a big sort of, catastrophic, hysterical, dramatic, sort of event, they just gradually burn and burn slowly and quietly and rusting into a state of burnout. And these people can be the telecells people, the people who are it's that relentless grind of picking the phone up, having someone say no,
and they're not working.
Exactly. Yeah. They're not building their resilience. They're not re-energizing. And they've got some boss who's sitting there going, here's my whip and I'm going to lash you back, because that's what we call
they say do more of it.
Exactly. And by the way, here's a button. And if I press this button, what happens is you get more money. And actually, I keep pressing that button. And suddenly the money's really not good enough because I'm just bored. And a lot of salespeople spend this life of being bored stiff or scared stiff. And that's a huge catalyst for cortisol poisoning, and we call that stress. And of course, if you start to lose that meaning in your work, then of course you can see how that will start to fall apart. And that's why good sales managers, sort of engender this sense of camaraderie, this sense of shared ownership, this sense often of team targets, this sense of a community. So actually, if Fred over there is not doing well and Jenny's doing great over here, that they share the load a little bit more. And I think sometimes in sales, we've gone too far towards this idea of individual results. And we've lost this idea of the shared, the collective, the community.
Part of the tribe.
You've just actually taken the words out of my mouth. You've obviously read Steve Peters as well. And
I finally had this epiphany really this year that we've been working at kind of the wrong level, kind of this human to human level, where we really should be thinking mammal to mammal.
Correct.
And just because that's really where we live.
Yeah.
Up here, trying to reason our way through it. It's just the wrong level. You just got to get to, the hormones, our mammal brains,
that's it.
Tribalism, being part of a group, all of these things.
And what's fascinating, and I don't know how this works in the States, but we see this a lot. We've seen the arrival of the female gender in the workplace. And initially...
women here for years.
Yeah, I mean, allegedly half of the UK... Well, women, who knew? but joking aside, actually, what they brought was a different way of thinking about selling.
Yes.
They had a different way of thinking about relationships, a different way of thinking about self-awareness. And there was less of the posturing and sort of...
the hunter. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a more polite thing. I was trying to from an unfortunate British expression there. But... What struck me is that they had this sense of actually, instead of forcing, pushing, driving, they allow people to buy rather than forcing people to buy because I'm going to sell harder than their resistance is. So in other words, sometimes I was listening to one of your other podcasts and the guy was talking about being on a forecourt. And what you'll see with some guys is them sort of people chasing the customer around the site going, hey, I've got one here, and it's in blue, it's in pink, and why can't you have this? Whereas often the different gender approach is to say, hey, what are you looking for? and we've got one over here. What do you think about that? And then the customer says, yeah, I'd quite like to buy that.
Well,
and then it costs us so much less effort in the sale. But we've got ourselves, I think, certainly in sales, sometimes with some people, building a culture that's so macho that actually it's doing us damage, because actually the only way to survive and to build the meaning is to really stimulate the dopamine valve. And if you're a leader who thinks that actually having people dopamined up to the eyeballs, when in other words means addicted, and the risk is that if you get people addicted to dopamine, it's very easy for them to click into other areas, which is why in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and particularly the American work environment, there was so much reliance on alcohol, because it's the same hit. So, if we want to keep people clean and fresh and such like, we need to have people who are they're not addicts, and there shouldn't be addicts to work, and there should be meaning, and they should be doing the job in less time, not more. Coming to work, and people need greater accountability in what they're doing. I think far too much of the time I find people burning out because they don't take accountability. So they spend far too much time blaming everybody else.
Yes.
Rather than, that's a classic thing. You sit down as a sales director and you say to your top 10 salespeople, why did those last 10 sales not complete? The good salespeople say, because I wasn't good enough. The poor salespeople say, well, it's because of the price.
It's everything but me.
Everyone but me. Whereas, of course, the good salespeople say that was me, and they say that was my failure to persuade that person that price point was right, or that value. So, in other words, this is what I can do immediately, and this is what I'll do differently next time around. So, you build accountability, and what you start to do as a great sales director is you count the learning points. You don't spend your entire time with the people who are blaming, the customer. It's not the customer's fault that your inability to sell means that they don't buy from you. And I think the people with the highest accountability tend to have great resilience, and people with great resilience really do resist burnout more, with less effort, I should say.
That's almost counterintuitive.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Yeah, of course it is. That's the point. You think blaming everybody else would make your life easier.
Wouldn't it?
Yeah, you would think so, wouldn't you?
And everybody I know who is clinically burnt out, where they just cannot do anything to save their lives. They never take an ounce of responsibility.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not an ounce.
And people don't realize, people don't realize they have a choice, but then they're not accountable for their choice. So my top lawyer that I was talking about earlier says that, well, it's not my choice to work this late. It's because I have to, because if I don't do it, who will?
Yeah.
Now, so if you weren't doing the job of 3.5 people, perhaps they'd hire another lawyer. Yeah, we are short of resource at the moment. We're one person light who said, well, they don't need that person because they've got you working 2 jobs badly instead of 1 job really well.
And let's say the people who are listening, I'm sure everybody has sensed a little bit of burnout. If they're feeling it, or somebody close to them is suggesting it, what should they do?
Well, first things first. The idea of going on a holiday and lying on a beach and doing nothing, for some people, is the idea of hell on wheels. So, bizarrely enough, what you have to do is you have to purge the dopamine and the cortisol from your system. And the slowest way of purging chemicals from your system is to lie down and do nothing. So actually things like singing, laughing, dancing, jumping around, playing sports, being energized, using the sort of creative side as well as the sort of, so swimming is not great for you, but jogging is, because using more of your whole body. Singing and dancing is great, better for you than swimming, because actually using that whole body and you're flexing your whole muscle, and cortisol is being driven out of your system. And linking together fast cortisol reduction with using your creative mind is great. And if you're particularly one of those people that likes dealing with other people, likes talking to other people, then go meet and talk to people. Now, if you're a heavy introvert, going on holiday is fine as long as what you're doing is getting spa treatments, massage, you're reading fiction, you're laughing if you need to, but your mind's being distracted into, again, that creative, visualized side. So what you're not doing is lying there and your mind's going rush, 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 where. You're using mind either in a physical sense or in losing yourself in a sort of a book in that sort of sense. So it's re-energizing, repairing. And the point you're trying to do is to sleep better. And there's a bunch of very simple breathing exercises you can use to actually really get a good night's sleep, build a good routine and get yourself off to sleep. And, if you're new into a relationship, and I remember years and years ago being new into a relationship, we never had problems with burnout then. And we did get a lot of sleep. And actually being together with your partner and having fun with your partner and your soulmate and reconnecting on a physical and emotional level is really part of it, because that's one of the first things to go. It's often your significant other who notices you got burnout, because actually your ability to physically touch, emote, connect, hug, all that stuff goes out of the window. It's really strange. You notice guys not connecting with their kids so much, being slightly removed from people. And you'll see that window of, that personal space vacuum thing that we have, how close we get to people, that gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And you'll often find wives and partners, husbands, partners discovering that first. And that's one of the ways you can fix it. So reconnecting with human beings, hugging, all that sort of stuff is really, really good for you. I mean, if you're one of those people that doesn't like hugging and such, like, I'm not recommending it, but it is really great.
And
as I remember.
Because the natural thing or the intuitive thing would be to isolate, wouldn't it?
Yes, it would.
Turn the TV on, lock the door, and just chill out.
But you see, that's not using the mind.
That's right. It's rest, but it's not.
Well, it's not even rest. When you're watching the television, your metabolic rate is lower than when you're asleep. So you'd be better off going to bed. You'd get better rest going to bed than you would watching the television. What you want to do is you need to use your mind in a creative way, drawing, journaling, however you might want to do it. I'm an ex-musician, so guess what? If I want to
play an instrument,
listen to music, go and see a concert. I find, watching sports, some people go and watch sports because that visceral, all those people around you.
Crowd in a public area.
Exactly. You're part of that massive community, the thing you said earlier. Yeah. And sometimes, as a sales team, you need to do those things together. You need to just go out sometimes and have a good laugh.
Yes.
You often find that in the emergency services, the fire, police, emergency service, ambulance and such like. They have what we call over in the UK very black humour. And that means actually they laugh at things like, if someone's fallen out of a window. And
normally inappropriate things.
They've had a horrible, experience. The jokes they tell to each other are appalling, but it brings them together. It allows them to laugh they laugh on the same wavelength. And actually, funnily enough, laughter using puns is very, very good and creative for the brain.
Yeah. And how about the whining and the bitching and moaning and the water cooler gossiping? Does that help or hurt?
Well, what do you think?
I think it hurts.
Of course it does.
It feels good though at the moment, though, doesn't it?
Misery collects. However, all good leaders, I mean, you've used the mnemonic of the bitching, moaning, and whinging, which is the BMW method we all talk about. And I've not heard that before. I'm a Mercedes-Benz driver, so I can use the BMW method all the time with impunity. And I often talk to leaders and managers about having a BMW drive-by at the beginning of a meeting. And you just get people to come in and you say, what's been the most challenging thing of your week? And you allow them to have a good old bitch, moan and whinge, clear the air and say, right, let's move on. And it sort of punctures. And of course, what starts to happen after a while, there starts to be some banter and some amusement and some humor. And here's the really important thing. As the leader, you listen to that content. And if you're just in the drama, bitching, moaning and whinging, you'll talk about what happened. But once people start talking about what's coming, that's anxiety. And as a leader, you have to watch out for anxiety, because fear of the future, fear of the unknown is something as a leader we have to watch out, because that really, really, really starts to affect burnout faster than just about anything else. So as a leader, we've got to watch that. And the BMW drive-by is a nice way to sort of deal with that. Yeah,
and I think a classic sales leader mistake is putting people on what we call a plan in the US, 90 days to make your number or you're out.
Yeah.
And I've never seen it work once.
Well, it's very interesting. We have a grid that allows you to isolate what we call the honest citizens of your sales team, your stars, your erratics, or the people there you put them on, and we call those the con artists. because what you do is you put them on plan for 90 days, and normally they're okay. And then they come off plan, and then they're terrible again, and sort of boom, bust, boom, bust, boom, bust. And then you have the people who are your also-rans, who are sort of neither here nor there, and you've got your deadwood, and they're on the way out as legally as and efficiently as possible. And actually, the point of what's fascinating is you'll find that leaders and managers today with the sales teams are spending all of their time with the deadwood, the erratics, and the also-rans. And yet the way they make your number is to spend the time with the honest citizens and your stars. Yeah. But of course, everybody's spending time because of HR, because we're just poor at managing people. Rather than saying, actually, how do we sweat? It's a bit like, developing our strengths rather than our weaknesses. Turn your strengths into superpowers and ignore your weaknesses a bit. I mean, the people that aren't helping and not working, if they're not willing, move them on. Work with people you want to work with and who want to work with you. And, if the job has no meaning and they're just sitting there because they need to pay the bills, they're the people that are going to burn out, because they're going to rust into burnout.
And have you seen people like really what I call clinically burnt out, where they blame everybody else? And I've seen these people taking minimum wage jobs just because they don't even believe it's even possible to get a great sales job anymore. Can they turn around?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Everyone. Because if you were good, if you were talented, remember skill is for life, isn't it?
Yeah.
Attitude comes and go. And that's why I think sometimes we over egg the passion and the mindset and all that stuff. Sometimes you do need a good degree of skill and process to be good at your job. You can burn out and you can come back. And I can evidence it for myself, because years ago I was on a very high paid job, and I suddenly realized one day I had a condition called shingles, which is...
Yeah, I know shingles. Yeah.
Shingles. Nasty, a horrible thing. I got this rash, and it was because I'd had chicken pox, and I had the shingles. And I was exhausted, absolutely exhausted. And I couldn't keep my eyes open, and I was sleeping. And, and I remember sitting down with my wife and saying, "What's the matter with me?" She said, "Well, you haven't had a holiday for 5 years. You've never taken a break. You're doing this job, which is the job of two people. You've turned this company around from a real sort of basket case into something that's really, great. It's time you step back now and looked after yourself a little bit, because now all you're doing is you're damaging yourself and the company." And it didn't take long. Actually, what I did is I went and studied. I got myself a master's. And because it's that using the mind in a different way. So I got my first master's, and what happened then was I came back and I was great. And it took me no time at all to come back. Because it's about how, instead of depleting your mind by using it, it's a bit like hitting a hammer over and over and over and over and over again. You overuse that muscle.
Yep.
And actually the point of the mind, instead of just doing the same job over and over and over again, is to widen your idea out. I was talking to someone in the trucks sales world quite recently, and saying to them, you have to understand people just don't come and buy a truck. What they want to understand is how that truck affects the customer's customer. So if you go and see a haulage company, what's going on in haulage over the next 3 years? And they're saying, we've never thought about it that way before.
Right.
I said, well, no, because you've only ever sold trucks one way before, which is why your numbers are all over the place. Because everybody else is doing this now. Because actually it's fulfilling, it's interesting. You're sitting down with trucks buyers who are entrepreneurs, and you're engaging, and they're going, blimey, you're different. You understand my business. You understand how this will affect the scheduling of it, and this new legislation is coming in 18 months' time, and I'll be ready, and I can have this as an off-balance sheet acquisition. And suddenly we're having a professional conversation. Now, you don't have to be friends with the people you sell to. You just need to respect you, don't you? And so this idea of having a wide brain that is interested in lots of different things, rather than just being completely rigid and just focused on one thing. And one of the things I'm saying to my lawyer at the moment, that my current person who's going to be burned out quite quickly, is I'm going to give her a bunch of books to read, and I know she's going to hate reading every single one of them, but she'll learn something when she comes back from it, and she'll go, that's actually quite interesting, because she's hyper intelligent. So the way to hook her in to use her brain differently is to appeal to her intellect. So that's what I'll do.
And do you see this high correlation between people in burnout and other addictions, alcoholism, drug addiction, or?
It's a very clever question, and it deserves a better answer than the glib one I'm sort of going to give you. So I'm just going to think about it for 20 milliseconds. The answer is yes. Yeah, but the problem here, the confusion here is that if you're addicted to anything, you will burn out. So because alcohol creates burnout in itself,
Right.
so do drugs.
Yeah.
But it's not quite the same. It has all the same manifestations, but it comes from a different place. Your point is, if you're highly addicted to work, could you then be addicted to alcohol? The answer is yes.
Yeah.
But if you're one of the real high functioning people, you won't have time to be drinking alcohol because you'll be too busy working.
Again,
And
yeah.
you'll be seeing alcohol as actually just something that's it's an
Distraction from
irritation.
work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you'll get a better hit from working harder.
Yeah.
And
Cool.
it's bizarre, isn't it? It sometimes just needs, you know, someone who is rough and tough enough just to sit down and, you know, we call it shaking them gently by the throat in the UK, and just pointing out to people that this is going to kill them. Because actually there is no other way of doing it. In 2 years' time, what use will you be? Dead.
That's a great way to end it. So where can people go to connect with you and learn more about your work?
Well, on LinkedIn, I'm at Russell Thackeray, and Facebook is the same. My company is called QED, so the email address is qedod.com. Feel free to come on over. We've got online courses. We've got all sorts of interesting things, and I speak. And I'm in the process of joining the noble circuit of writing a book. And at that point, I'll be coming back and saying, hey, look at this book all about burnout.
Well, we'll have to have you back on the show then.
That'd be super. Thank you, Brian.